We've had an uncountable amount of dumb things happen in Star Wars since Disney took over in 2012. Holdo maneuver. But this just might take the cake as the worst one. I laughed out loud when I was watching this episode and this happened, because especially when she pulls out a fire extinguisher. The only way this scene works is if their shields are active, which they aren't. That way it forms a pocket of oxygen that they can breathe in, for one, and to feed the fire. The whole reason they're out there is because they're doing shield repairs. And we've seen from a lot of the games, and I think there might be a couple shots in the movies, where you can see that when the shields are active, it makes like this big bubble around the ship. So if that shield bubble was around the ship, then yes, possibly a fire could be fed because there's oxygen under there. But obviously there isn't because they're wearing spacesuits because there's no oxygen. It shows a shocking lack of understanding of space. And if this doesn't highlight the fact that the people working on Star Wars right now do not understand it at all, then I don't know what does. And I've heard some really stupid defenses of this scene already, and I'd like to refute them. People, mostly on Twitter, have tried to refute this scene and say that it makes sense by posting this image from The Phantom Menace. But if you have two brain cells to rub together, you know that this isn't fire. It's chaff from an explosion. An enemy ship was shooting all these droids, and what we're seeing is the chaff from the exploding droid. That's not a continuous fire. You have a legitimate, basically, campfire running in that scene. And if you go back and look through, especially the original 6 movies, and I'm sure it comes up in some of the TV shows and the Clone Wars, you can see what looks like fire. They probably used explosions in the movie back in the 70s and 80s to do the effect. But if you look closely, every single one of those shots, the fire goes out almost instantly. And in the longer shots where you see fire billowing out of the ship for a while, like this one, the reason why that is happening is because the oxygen inside the ship is on fire and it's being shot out of the ship. So all these moments where you see explosions coming from inside the ship going out into space, those actually make sense because you're going from an oxygen-rich environment to an oxygen-less environment. So yeah, of course if there's explosions in space, like if the International Space Station blows up, you're going to see that. But it doesn't mean there's going to be like a campfire and it's going to continue to burn. You know how many space movies we've seen where there's explosions in space? Gravity, Interstellar, there's so many more. And then of course the infamous the 2 Death Star explosions. Those make sense because once again it's a concentrated amount of energy in one spot and that energy is being blown out in an explosion. And it's not even necessarily fire, it's more like plasma. But obviously in the 70s and the 80s they didn't have the technology, they didn't have CGI to show plasma explosions, so they just used an actual miniature exploding. And yeah, there's like some really long shots, like when the Star Destroyer or the Super Star Destroyer Executor is on fire and crashing. Again, you have a rush, like a wind tunnel of oxygen flying out of that ship for who knows how long, because that thing is huge. So you could have oxygen flying out of that ship for, I don't know, 10 minutes, all the while it's burning inside the ship, and so it has to escape out into space where it goes out. I'm sorry, this is just ridiculous. There's no defending this scene. There's countless examples in The Phantom Menace and Return of the Jedi where you're seeing ships blow up left and right constantly, and it's just like a puff of, it's like almost like a puff of smoke where you see fire for a split second and then it just whoosh, goes out right away. Obviously, George Lucas has a brain in his head, and he knows that when an explosion happens, the fire's only going to last a few seconds on a small ship like this. So that's why you see stuff like this. Clearly, the people writing this crap do not have brains in their heads. So if anyone tries to come after you and say, hey, no, the fire makes perfect sense, here's all these scenes from the old Star Wars movies showing it, no, it's not even close to the same thing. This looks like somebody made a pile of wood, covered it in lighter fluid, and just lit it. So please, stop trying to defend this scene or this show.